Now that we've spoken a bit about the programming language that we'll be using of Python, I want to talk about the IDE that we'll be using. So an IDE is an integrated development environment. And again, that's a computer program that we are going to use to write our computer programs. So if you think a little bit of the things that we've discussed so far, one thing we need to be able to do is write our code. And that's something that we're going to have to type in, sometimes called the source code, and that's going to be put into what's called the text editor. It could be very similar to something like Microsoft Word or a Notepad object. It's just where you go to type your code. An IDE is going to provide that for us. That text editor is going to be different from something like Microsoft Word or Notepad because it's going to know what programming language we're going to be using, and what it's going to do is try to help us program by giving us visual cues. So something we'll discuss as we go along in Python is that your indentation is very important in Python, and one of the visual cues that our IDE will provide for us are these vertical lines showing us how things line up so we can keep track of our indentation. It's also going to color code things for us. So when I talk about those reserve words that we discussed in the previous video, our IDE is going to make reserved words a particular color. And then anytime we're using a different word that isn't a reserved word in Python, that'll be another color. And when we're using a particular data type, it might be one color. When we're making a function call, it might be another color. When we're writing a comment in our programming language. So things like colors and spacing and these visual cues help us keep track of all these nitty-gritty details that we will need in order to program properly. Our IDE is also going to provide a compiler for us, like we discussed, that compiler that Grace Hopper invented to then take our source code and actually tell the computer, we're done typing it now. Now we want to execute it. We want to run that code. Computer, we're ready. Read it and do what it says. So we have the space to type our code with some color coding and some other visual cues to help us in that writing process. And then the compiler will say, okay, we're ready now, computer. Translate it into machine language and do it. And what that's going to do is create the executable file for our program. The executable is the program that we've created, and that should pop up for us in another window. And last but not least, an IDE is going to help us in the debugging process. Help is a strong word. You may not feel that way in the beginning, but our IDE is going to have tools that once we learn how to master them will help us find any possible mistakes we might have in our code. The specific IDE that we're going to be using is called Reple. And you can access it by typing in repl.it into a web browser and hitting enter. That will take you to a website, Reple's website, and we'll be coding in that online environment. That's going to help us with a whole bunch of things for the way that we have our particular course set up. So first of all, by using a web-based browser, we don't have to install any software on our computer. That can always be problematic. It takes up space. If you're not using your own machine, it can be difficult to access. It'll solve that problem for us since every computer we have should have access to a web browser. It's also going to help us prevent system issues. One of the biggest differences we probably would encounter as a class is that some of us have Macs and some of us have PCs, and those are totally different software systems. And that can create issues where I'm trying to run code on my computer, you're trying to run code on yours. If you have a Mac and I have a PC, something might work on my computer and not on yours. Repl is going to help us avoid that by using the internet to run the code. Another thing that's great about Reple is that collaboration is going to be very easy. I can create a project in Reple, I can share it with all of you, and every single one of you can access the code that I'm working on. So I can type a line and you can type the next line from my computer to your computer. It's also going to help us when it comes time for office hours, or if you need help on your code, that you can just share a project with me through Reple, and I'll be able to see exactly what you're doing, and I can get in there virtually and from far away to add comments in or help you write your code. The other thing that's great about REPL is that should you decide that you love computer programming and Python was awesome, but you're ready to learn a new language, REPL can actually be used across all sorts of different languages, and so you don't have to download and install new software each time you learn a new programming language. So these are some of the benefits that we'll encounter with REPL. Just to show you real quick what it looks like. This is an example of a project being run in REPL. So over here, we have our source code. That's what I've written right here. And this is the text editor that REPL provides. It also provides line numbers, which are really helpful. So I can direct your attention to something like, look at that great comment on line 22, and you know where to look. You can see, even though you do not understand this code and are not expected to understand this code, you can see that there are different colors, all of which mean something. You can see that it's got those vertical lines to help me keep track of that indentation. When I'm ready to run my code, I just hit the run button and that'll call the compiler to run the code. And right here is my executable. This is the program I've created to draw a real pretty little design, and it says, check out this cool spirograph. So this is an example of what REPL looks like. And if I share a project with you in REPL, you will have this available to you through the same web browser, and you could come in here and you could type, hello, my name is, into the source code, and you could have control of this as well.